You once considered serial killers? What drew you to that? What made you consider that? And then how does that relate to, or how does that compare to what you do now?
I've always been super fascinated in behavioral psych. So I don't interview serial killers, but I still talk to people and I'm fascinated by what led them to where they are. So I switched over to kinesiology after 2 years of forensic psychology.
Why do we look at the car accident sort of thing? Because if you look, because we're able to track these things, especially actually for females love murder. It's so weird. It's the point of memes too, because it's like, they did a skit on Saturday Night Live. They're like, hey, I've got Saturday night, my boyfriend's not around, I'm gonna stay in, pour a nice glass of red wine and watch nothing but murder. I was gonna ask you your favorite serial killer, but that's too dark. Shall go. There were 25 years of experience and a career in lecturing at Simon Fraser University. She is a powerhouse in the field of, especially renowned for her return to sport methodologies and unconventional problem-solving skills. Conventional. Let's dive in with Carmen Bott. Did I pronounce that correctly, Carmen? Did I get that?
You did. Thank you so much, Jimmy. You absolutely did. It's great.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
First thing I always ask guests is, what are we drinking? I get the hard questions out of the way first. But you look like you're at work.
I am, and I just got off. Got off field with an athlete, so I'm drinking water with some Neo Squirt in it. It's not new.
We don't check.
It's tasty.
We don't check.
Here we go.
Let me ask you this: what would you be drinking if you were like home by the fire, whatever? As my dad walks in the background, what
I would be drinking a green bottled beer, 100%.
What do you like? What's green bottled that you like?
Well, of the American variety, I do not mind the odd Rolling Rock.
Yeah, Rolling Rock's not
right. But I do prefer the green bottled beer from Italy. So Peroni would be my top choice. And the second choice would be anything from France, really, in a green bottle.
Rolling Rock. So just before we hit record, you didn't know that my background was in radio broadcasting. So I mentioned that, but I never know when people join the show or find out or whatever. I used to make a big deal about it because it was my background, but then you feel like you talk about it enough and you stop talking about it. But you bring up Rolling Rock. Rolling Rock used to have this mega event once a year, and it was kind of like Coachella, but they called it the Rolling Rock Town Fair. And essentially, I think it was like a 2-day festival, if memory serves me, in Robe, Pennsylvania, where Rolling Rock is brewed, over on the west side of Pennsylvania. And I went to it once, and it was mind-blowing. And this was like a way for a beer brewer, a beer company, to really just be like, this is what we're about. And now I'm thinking about it, I am like heartbroken that they don't do that anymore. But that was
so it's the Rolling Rock culture, I guess.
That was the idea. That was the idea, which is cool. Like, let me just show you exactly what we're into, and then here it is.
Did it make you drink more Rolling Rock after that experience?
Those 2 days it sure did. And because then Rolling Rock was the sponsor of the radio station, so they just they hooked us up with stuff and beers and stuff like that. So of course, but I'm still
great
about it 20 years later. All right, so I mentioned the intro, Your Majesty. Where's that come from? You got
for sure.
Where's that come from?
I change the sort of my title daily, actually. So it really depends on my mood. My husband often just refers to me as the Angry Viking. So it really does depend on the audience and the day and the mood. So I've just felt like saying Her Majesty when I filled out your form.
Yeah. In radio, you had two choices. You have an on-air name and you're sure of it, and you're like, that's my name. Okay. Or if you are even a little wishy-washy, an on-air name will be assigned to you, and it will not be great. I'm telling you that. That's how it was.
Well, absolutely. Well, it makes it like team sport, right? You can't nickname yourself.
No, you can't.
Like that's actually forbidden in team sport. And if you do, then you're a weirdo. So, the fact that other people got to have that privilege of giving you a nickname or a code name, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. All right. First round brought to you by our friends from Owens Recovery Science, Johnny and his team. If you're looking to get certified in personalized blood flow restriction rehabilitation training, Johnny Owens and his team have done it all over the country, all over the world. Find them online at owensrecoveryscience.com. They also have their own podcast where they just dive deep into BFR stuff, as the cool kids are calling it. It's called the Owens Recovery Science Podcast. Very easy to remember. Okay. So I want to start with strength training for female athletes. You emphasize, or you focus on, or you say female athletes need to get stronger. Why is that so important? I agree, but I want to know why you think that is vital and important.
Well, I think it's kind of like strength training to me for the female athlete is sort of like being an underdog. Like a lot of times, female athletes can move well and maybe have great skill in their sport, but it's the ace card that we don't see, but makes them a lot more resistant to potential injury. But it also has that confidence boosting effect. If you know, or you're fairly certain that the person that you are, I don't know, defending or taking on one in a situation, if you know you're physically superior, or maybe you're certain about that, I think that that is related to risk-taking ability and performance in sports. So I wouldn't be arrogant and say that, oh, if your squad is higher, you're going to perform better, like direct correlation. We know that squatting isn't the same as playing field lacrosse,
Right.
for example, but we do know that girls that lift weights and get stronger from that process have a different attitude about their bodies. And I think that that should be celebrated. But some of the barriers with strength training, also have to do with females maybe, feeling that it's not socio-culturally
Right.
acceptable to be
Right.
in the weight room lifting and grunting and groaning and
Right.
doing all that stuff.
So that was actually where I was
Mhm.
going next. How do you, number one, tease that out, like find out if that is the case, right? And then how do you overcome
Um,
that, or how do you can't make someone do so, but how do you maybe lay out lay out the path in front of them and say there's two paths: doing it, not doing it, and here's the pros and cons.
Usually, the best way to approach the subject with maybe a more hesitant population is to start by talking to them about, what are their goals, but then what do those goals actually look like? And then describe what, physically dominating an opponent looks like. And then asking them and being curious, well, what do you think the path is to getting to those particular goals? And oftentimes, when you present it that way, the athlete will sort of come to the conclusion themselves, and then you ask them, "Would you like to work with me and have me show you how to do these types of exercises,
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z?" I think the worst thing we can do is be advice givers. As much as we're all tempted to
No.
do that, right? And
No.
say, "Hey, you know what? You really need to lift weights. You really need to get
No.
stronger." Oftentimes, people are quite aware that they maybe are not strong enough. And they're looking more on the guidance of the how to do that safely and effectively. And the biggest difference in the adolescent population between boys and girls is that girls tend to like to feel proficient at something before they engage in it. So you might need to start with just the movement itself, right? And then ask them, would you like to try this movement with some load? How much load would you like to try? And then you could say something like, "Did you realize that what's the maximum weight of a suitcase when you go to the airport?" Right?
Context.
And then they'll say, "Oh, they'll know, right? Because
Right.
50 pounds or whatever." "Okay, do you like to go shoe shopping when you're on holidays?"
Context.
What girl doesn't? "Oh, yeah, okay, so if you filled your suitcase full of shoes that you bought in New York or London or wherever you went traveling, would you be able to carry that suitcase? Because you definitely gotta get the shoes home,
Obviously.
right?" Obviously, because they're amazing, and next thing you know it, you've got them doing a suitcase deadlift with 50 pounds. So sometimes it's just about painting a picture, and it's more about strong encouragement and empowerment versus, just talking about, well, the benefits of
Right.
strength training are blah, blah, blah. Like, that's boring and nobody really wants to listen to that.
We're not even 15 minutes in, and I think everything you just said was sort of a masterclass in a mini masterclass in motivational interviewing, starting with the end in mind, leaving, making it a question and not a statement, putting it in context, and letting them make their decision. Right? I mean, did you see that movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio? It was
I
about
did,
dreams. It was
yes.
like the
Yeah.
crux of that was that he could enter people's dreams. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the idea was, or the crux of that, spoiler alert, if you haven't, maybe fast forward if you haven't watched Inception, but the idea
Yes.
was it had to be the person's idea. You couldn't just plant your idea. It had to be their version, right? And so I thought this was like kind of like a
Absolutely.
cool premise, obviously, right? It was cool sci-fi. But the premise was like, yeah, if it isn't my idea, I'll probably do it maybe a little bit just to shut the other person up or get them away from me or whatever. And then eventually I'm just going to stop. But if it's my idea and ownership, like context of shoes, context of fear, I didn't realize that about females. Is that like, that's a thing, is they generally want to be more proficient before they start. Boys are just, we're just sort of dumb. We're like,
generally, yeah. But yeah, boys will be like, you get your ninth grader with the broccoli hair, right? That just
right.
picks it up and just starts savagely lifting it. Who does this look, right?
Go wrong.
It's boys really value, they value competition and hierarchy. So it's, I don't know if it's in their DNA or if it's socialization. I'm not a sociologist by any means, but I have a lot of training in mental performance and have done training in motivational interviewing, and had learned that, yeah, people are absolutely resistant to your advice. So maybe don't give it. Maybe just ask very powerful questions and be curious and go from there.
Yeah. I mean, did you watch Ted Lasso at all? You must have seen Ted Lasso,
Yes.
right? I mean, when he said
absolutely
that one scene, I think it was the last episode of season 1 where he's shooting the darts and he's like going to town and he's like, be curious, not judgmental. And like, I watch this, I work with a lot of organizations like APTA organizations or companies, and PTs specifically love to do this, which is what you just talked about, or you said, don't, why you shouldn't, but it's a great example, which is we love to say, well, research shows, and we start with that. And research,
as if they're going to value it as much as we do.
Correct. And actually,
like, I don't care.
If you want to go meta, I was reading something on behavior change science. Research shows that starting something with research shows does not help, because okay, here's one more thing. What are eggs good for me?
It works with me because I'm a scientist.
Right,
I'll be like, okay, now you have my ear, but you got to know your audience, right? Like you deal with a 15-year-old or even a 25-year-old professional athlete. They're like, look, how am I just going to be able to create separation with this guy? Like, that's what I want to do.
I feel like the context example you gave is also, there's a parallel in terms of research, which is like, if you're not someone like you, if you're not a sports scientist, right? Someone's standing on a field, standing on a pitch, and they're hearing someone say, well, research shows, it just feels so far away. It's like, yeah, but I'm here. You know what I mean? It's like, that's a lab. And if I'm not in the world of science, I don't understand. I'm like, oh, okay. But like, give me something practical. What do I do here? So just to say everything that is the research, right? But don't say that. Like, I'm not saying lie or put it in or dumb it down. I also don't say dumb it down. Put it in better context. If you're talking to someone who likes shoe shopping, put it in shoe context. I mean, I used to work for an organization, Fox Rehab, that specialized in treating older adults, and they would ask questions in context of grandkids, vacations. A lot of clinicians would do things in weights, like gallons of milk. It's like, we're going to lift this weight. Weight's too heavy. This is less than a gallon of milk. You want to be able to put your milk away in the fridge? And like, oh, well, yeah. Next thing you know, wouldn't you know it, context leads to adoption. Who knew? But starting with, well, the evidence says. That's like the equivalent of like, well,
and the evidence is not very strong in exercise prescription on the whole anyways. Right. So it's like, it's really weak in some areas. Strength training is fairly good because that's so easy to monitor and measure, but in other facets, like even neuromotor stuff, like balance training, gave a lecture on balance training for older adults yesterday. And I just said, we have no idea how many sets and reps. Right. No clue. There are no guidelines. So then what?
Take that for what it's worth, right?
Well, yeah, it's just like if you were going to teach someone how to dance, it's not like you're doing 3 sets of 10.
Right, that's a good example.
Of the blah 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 dance. You're just going to put on the music, you're going to explore some movements. Then when you're kind of sick of doing those, you might do some other ones. Learning is it's messy and it's very nonlinear. Yeah. And so is rehab. And so as long as people
when you put it in that context, when we try to make it really clean and neat is when we're sort of, I mean, we don't know. So why are we trying to formularize some things that we don't know how to do that, right?
Totally. And then you're dealing with humans, and humans are just pure chaos. We really are.
That's like kind of
especially if we've had too many rolling rocks, right?
Right. Or not.
We're pure chaos.
Or not enough rolling rocks. You never know.
Or not enough. Okay, so now we're talking about a threshold. Fair. Right. I get you. Yep.
I will begin this research immediately. Let me switch to ACL. You say that while ACL injuries can't be prevented, right, risk can be mitigated, which is good. So what are key strategies like for mitigation? Because like every once in a while on Twitter, you'll get people who go round and around on like a word, and I love specificity in language and things like that. When you see people say injury prevention, and then they'll go around like, you can't prevent an injury. Okay. but we can mitigate risk, right? So I'm being careful with the words.
Right.
Key strategies
Yes,
for
so am
mitigation.
I.
Yeah, you have to be, or else they'll come after you because we're recording this stuff. Okay.
They will. They will. It's mean. Okay. Yeah. So your question is,
You
what are the things we could do? What are the controllables? Yeah, there are a few, and one of them you've already identified is that, perhaps an athlete isn't strong enough to handle the forces that are involved in the activities that they want to be able to do. There is a big difference in mechanical load in jogging versus decelerating, for example. So, and there's often a mismatch between what an athlete or an individual is exposed to in their training setting and the volume that actually occurs in sport. So if we use decelerations for example, in all sports except American football, and when I say all sports, I mean sports that involve they're invasive in nature. So you're sharing turf with your opponent or space with your opponent. They're stopping and starting. It's intermittent, usually a team sport. So we're kind of in that vein where a lot of ACLs happen. We actually know, because good scientists have actually measured the number of times athletes decelerate, and it's more frequently than accelerating. And then if we know that decelerating has about 3 times the forces of an acceleration, it's more mechanical stress on the body versus like a metabolic stress on the body, that acceleration begets. Right there we have, if we have a mismatch in exposures, so we've only exposed someone to, let's just use the number 50 decelerations in a training week, yet in their game, coach is like, game went into overtime, you're a starter, you're not coming off the field, and next thing you know, you've done 200. And you wonder why,
right.
you know, the knee's like, okay, I need a timeout. I'm done. So there's that piece. There's also some, sort of neuromuscular factors in terms of the control of the knee position on cutting and changing of direction. So we do know that there is a relationship between extreme valgus moment in the knee at about 30 degrees of knee flexion, especially when there's no glute strength on the same side and the trunk itself is leaning in the opposite direction. So there's like a physical component to that. And then there's also a technical component to that. And last time I looked, Jimmy, there weren't too many sport coaches out there teaching athletes how to cut, how to land, how to change direction. And so what happens is these athletes hurt themselves. They end up in a clinic. They end up seeing their PT, and then after 4 or 5 months, they come and see me, and I'm now teaching them for the very first time how to slow down, how to cut, how to
Wow.
change direction properly, where to put their foot. Because sidestep cutting, at least in rugby, is one of the biggest triggers for an ACL trauma, and with non-contact trauma. So basically the foot hits the ground and it's too far outside the center of mass. It's going to be outside the center of mass, but it's too far. And, that was a strategy an athlete got away with, maybe 100 times. And now the 101st time,
Right.
they're not getting away with it. And I'm sure that there's some genetic susceptibility. There's definitely the influence of gender, right? Or female athletes being at higher risk, but actually adolescents right now are leading the race. They seem to be the highest risk. And that's really sad because that's new. And that tells me that maybe some of these young people are being asked to do things with their bodies that their bodies aren't ready for physically.
I was going to ask you why. Speculation, obviously. So maybe I know just in my local area, kids are playing year round. They're playing the same thing year round. They're doing
same thing.
They're on 2, 3, 4 different teams year round, or doing camps or showcases almost year round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would imagine that definitely plays a role. It's hard to say, if we use the research, according to the research, right? Like this idea of, does something cause something? Because it's really like I just could have used examples like a huge pot, and you're just making stew and you're throwing in everything, including the beer in the stew, right? And part of those ingredients in that stew is the lack of exposure to the right things. So heavy lifting, And that could be body weight actually,
Right.
because if you can't do a pistol squat, you're probably not very strong, right? And it could be the change of direction stuff, but then it's also the other side of the coin where it's too much of the wrong stuff, right? So kids doing a lot of endurance exercise. So I teach a growth and motor development course at the university, and we talk a lot about what would be appropriate in terms of exercise prescription for children and adolescents. So children are typically aged 5 to 11, typically, and then adolescents would be, or youth are 12 to 17 years old. And one of the rules of thumb is whatever age you're at, that's the number of hours a week of total training, right? But that still doesn't tell us very much,
Right.
right? Like if I'm training a 14-year-old and they're doing 14 hours a week of
A lot.
basketball,
It's a lot.
right? That's a lot of load because they're jumping, cutting, changing direction. Now, if we took that 14 hours and did maybe half the time was the higher intensity doses and the other half was walking through the motion offense and maybe doing some shooting and some ball handling drills, then okay, now that's probably acceptable. But we don't really know exactly what the doses should be, but what we need to do better is just monitor how kids are adapting to the doses, right? So, looking for, well, I'm a big proponent of adolescent athletes seeing a PT, every couple weeks, just a check in, check under the hood, like check for excessive tone in certain areas of their body, check for a lack of mobility in a joint, right? In the ankles and in the hips. Keep checking these things. And then we get a bigger picture of what we might be dealing with. I have a 12-year-old, he'll be 13 next month, and he's going through his peak height velocity right now. So he's grown 3 inches since August, and
Wow.
it's November, right?
That's wild.
And it's really interesting to observe. And what I observe is that his muscles are tight. His connective tissue is tight because his bones are growing faster than the rate of adaptation of the tissue. So I have training in this area. I know what to do. I know that this isn't the time to do more basketball. It's the time to do some recovery and stretching and mobility work, right? And when he does those things, he tells me, he's like, I feel really good. My body feels really good. If he doesn't do those things, then he's like, "My calves are killing me, mom. Like it hurts to stand up from sitting too long." These are clues,
Right.
right? But maybe but I have training in this area, so do you, or your listeners probably do, but how can we help these parents? Because they're the ones paying for
Right.
all this stuff. And my question to them is, why do you need to have little Jimmy or Johnny in
Because
14 hours a week
because
basketball?
because some is good, so more is better, and because the other kid who beat him out for a spot last year is doing two teams, so we're going to do three because three is 33% better than two, and it becomes like a social.
The people have lost their minds.
Some
Like,
places. I mean, I hope this is the far end of the pendulum swing.
I hope so too, and it's just as bad in Canada. It's the same.
What sports in
We've got
Canada are at that level? Hockey has to be because
hockey.
even
Yeah,
even in
I
the
used
states,
to train hockey players at the age of 14 that had sports agents
get out of here.
at 14 years old. Yep, and this was 20 years ago when I first started coaching.
Wild.
Basketball is another one where kids are playing on their high school team, and they're also playing on a club team, and then they're playing all year, like you said. And the summertime is typically the off season of basketball, but nope, they're playing
Teams.
and they're traveling,
Right.
To
Well,
other countries to play.
now there's NIL deals. So like the money now just moved 4 years closer in theory, right? Because and there's more of it, or there's at least a wider funnel for it because I don't have to necessarily go pro. So a scholarship isn't necessarily the end of the line for a lot of these kids. So it's start earlier because there's money here. There could be money here. So there's
Could
motivation.
be, but the chances
I
are
know,
so
I
low.
know. But
And that's what it's an odds game. So I don't know what the
right.
stats are, but it's like 1%, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think we need to be a little bit more realistic about what those odds look like. And at the end of the day, I have a colleague in Toronto who trains a lot of very high level lacrosse players, and a lot of them go pro and they play in the NLL, which is the North American League. And every once in a while, I get a text from him and it'll say, "So, does your son still like you?" And I said, "Yep." Still likes me. How about your son? Does he still like you? Yep, still likes me. And it's a little bit of this sort of joke that we have in that at the end of the day,
I see.
are these kids enjoying the
Yeah.
fact that they're exhausted?
Well, I've
Do they
said
want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning when they're 15?
right. I mean, I heard somebody say it way better than me, which was your goal as a parent. I don't have kids myself, but your goal as a parent is to raise really great adults, is to create or help
Mhm,
create or put kids on a path to becoming really great adults. And
mhm.
listen, sport can absolutely do that, but it's the
Oh,
same thing,
yes.
right? Some is good and more is better. I liked your stew analogy. I thought that was good. Is there not enough of the good stuff or too much of the bad? Everything's a mix. You talked about monitoring, and we just did an episode with Matt Tuttle. Matt had in his career worked for the Denver Nuggets. He worked with the New York Red Bulls. So he's been around, and now he's doing his PhD and really he's focusing on athlete tracking. And I just assumed like the NBA, Major League like soccer, there's chips, and he's like, we have a lot, but he's like, I'll be dead honest. Everybody just thinks we have all this data. He's like, we're getting more of it. He said, there's a problem is we don't have enough of the right data, and we have so much of it. We got to figure out how to like make sense of the noise. So he's like, now we've got all this stuff coming in. So that's why he actually went to school, back to school to get his PhD in this. Cause he's like, this is where we think we are, but we're not. It was where a lot of people assume where we are was we know exactly everything going on with these players. He's like, we know more than we did a couple years ago, but
Mhm.
knowing more, collecting more would be good, and being able to collect the right stuff would be better. And then knowing what to do with it once you've got it all, he's like, well, that's the final step is that. So it's not as much as you can measure and chart and calculate. There's still a lot of variables there.
There are, and everybody has a different tolerance level,
Correct.
right,
Fluids
genetically,
again. Yeah.
and people have different nutrition,
Correct.
and so what you're putting into your bodies and how much you're sleeping, so the
Yep.
recovery side. But one thing I always tell young coaches or young therapists, because I do a lot of education with physiotherapists, I said, look, like go to practice. Or better yet, like when I sort of worked with Canadian women's wrestling team, I was with Wrestling Canada for 5 years. I decided, you know what, I'm gonna have to learn this sport because I came from softball and basketball. So I decided to learn to wrestle at
Yep.
like in my late 30s, and
Yeah.
I joined a jujitsu type gym,
So
and I
good.
learned pancreation, and it was awful, and I didn't like it, but I did it.
Yep. Yep.
But what I understood intimately were the demands,
Yeah.
intimately. And I also realized that I never need to see my chiropractor again because
Boom,
when someone
boom.
is like crushing your rib cage, you get adjustment for free
Yeah. My
every session.
I worked for my first clinic at a PT school. The owner, Carlos, was big
Mm,
into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and he would talk about it so
okay.
much. And finally, I'm sort of like you, where I'm like, you come in here and you're gi and you got all the bruises. I'm like, am I gonna get killed? He's like, no. He's like, we'll set you up with like a class, and I'll make sure everybody. And it was really cool. Like it was fun and it was interesting.
Totally.
Totally not my thing, but I went
Yep.
2 or 3 times, and I was like, this is cool. Like when I was younger, it was really easy it's easy to make fun of people who like are adults but build Legos or like weird dancing or whatever. I'm really excited. I'm just if you like something, even if I don't like it, I'm just like I'm so glad that you like that. So I was excited to
Totally.
for the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu
Yeah.
people, but I was like, I'm not coming here anymore because this hurts. And I knew
Yeah.
they were all like going at 10%.
People sweat too much. It's gross. Yeah.
I am also, you can't tell now because I'm not really doing anything, but I'm more of an endurance guy. But I have this part in
Okay.
me that got turned on when I started doing marathons where the minute my body is like, oh, we're doing something, and then I am immediately just the sweatiest person in the room. It was me and this guy, Steven, who was this
That's awesome.
hairy Middle Eastern guy in my PT school. We did
Of
hot
course.
yoga in PT school because our professor in therapeutic exercise was like, do all these different things. And we had a contest for sweatiest guy in class, just puddles. So we're sweaty,
There
but it's a good thing. It's a good it keeps me
that's
cool.
okay.
It's okay.
Absolutely. It is the way of cooling the body
It
down.
is.
Yeah, so I think your colleague that you had on the show is right.
Yeah.
We are collecting a lot of information that we may not be using, or we may be applying the wrong metrics
Right.
in the wrong places. Like I really don't care what the heart rate is of an NFL quarterback. I don't care what their heart rate is of a basketball player during a game. I don't care how many kilometers they cover in a game. It doesn't actually help me rehab their knee or prepare them for basketball. But what I am interested is how many times they change direction at an angle greater than 90 degrees. because I know through biomechanical analysis and basic physics that the loads are greater. And so I need to prepare them to do things that have the highest demands on their musculoskeletal system.
So you
Because that's
say,
where injuries occur,
right.
right?
So you mentioned, you've said before, strength and power are skills. Strength and power are skills. And I know about skills. It means that you can train them, because skills are not things. And this is where, like, I think I used to use these words and other people use these words interchangeably: talent and skill. And then I heard, I think it was Angela Duckworth, who's a writer,
Mm,
wrote the book Grit,
yep,
and she laid it out. And I was
yep,
like, oh, wait, talent and skills are different. So
yes,
I remember, talent you're born with. LeBron was born talented, but LeBron wouldn't be
100%.
LeBron unless he worked. So it's like talent times effort equals skill, skill times effort equals achievement. All right. So that's my little aside
Okay.
there. So you say that strength and power
Mhm,
are skills. So
100%.
how does that perspective change the way then how athletes should train?
Yeah, and I think it's maybe to preface, my mentors and all of the people that I have learned from are Eastern European. Okay, I am not Eastern European, I'm Canadian, but I sought out coaches that were either medalists in Olympic weightlifting
Wow.
or masters of sport. Okay, so in Russia, you can become a master of sport and you are highly proficient in many areas. So Pavel Tsatsouline, who owns Strong First,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
somehow saw something in me and spent time mentoring me and my husband, and he is one of the best movers I have ever met. He is an extremely well accomplished athlete because he could do, he has quite a large sort of palette of motor skills, but it was him that sort of, well, didn't sort of, he did, and sort of instill this mantra of strength is a skill. And so the place that I always start when I'm working with athletes is, to be strong and to lift a lot of weight, that's an outcome. You need to learn about the proper positions, but you also need to learn to hold tension. And so, and breathe. And so some of the key parts were around power breathing and when to hold your breath, when to breathe. We call it breathing behind the shield, which is also a term used in karate. So that way the spine is stable and protected, right? And so things like, we'll use the example of a pistol squat, right, which is a phenomenal expression of relative strength that most people cannot do. If I put two tennis balls in their hands, so one in one hand, one in the other hand, and I ask them to do three things. I ask them to pretend they're holding a pencil in their butt,
Okay.
okay, the butt pencil.
Got it.
And if you're a girl, you're holding two pencils. We're going to leave it at that.
Got it. Okay.
Um, brace for a punch, hold your breath. So hold your breath, brace for a punch is sort of the two together, and then squeeze the tennis balls on the eccentric phase, so the downward phase of the movement. I'm almost guaranteed I can triple their ability to do that exercise in about 2 seconds.
So why and how?
It's called the principle of hyper-irradiation, and it's something that I never learned in all my training in school, right? I'm Canadian trained in kinesiology undergrad, right? Master's in sports medicine, and never heard this term before. I was like, what does this mean? It was probably an Eastern, like a Russian term that got translated into English at
Right.
some point. And Russian to English, from what Pablo has explained to me, doesn't translate very well. So basically, if you make a fist, and you squeeze your fist just gently, you feel a bit of tension around like your lower forearm,
Mm.
right? But if you squeeze your fist even harder and you do some of those other things I said with the pencils,
Right.
you're going to start to feel the tension move up through your arm into your thorax, right into your torso. So it's basically spreads almost like a wave of tension and energy throughout your skeletal system. So there's certain things that we do with the body to create tension. Another trick, and then they're not tricks; they're actually scientific principles. But if the hand is in contact with the ground, we teach athletes to grip the ground and to place a majority of their weight in this part of the hand where there's the most amount of receptors.
Okay.
And so if we do that, that irradiates tension. So it's a way to kind of amp up the nervous system, which if we arouse and amp up the nervous system, we by default encourage a higher number of motor units to be recruited. And so part of the skill is learning very strong people have the ability to do two things. One, recruit more motor units to do that very precise task. They also can bypass the lower threshold motor units preferentially. And that takes practice. That's where the practice comes in. And when I say practice, I might say, okay, I want you to do push-ups, but you're going to do 30 sets of 2 as opposed to 2 sets of 30, because over 30 repetitions is very hard to create that level of tension.
Right.
Right. So this is, again, if we're talking, if we are chasing pure, like, high levels of strength and power. I've had female athletes that can power clean 225 pounds, at 160 pounds of body weight. We're talking, and these are not weightlifters. These are like athletes that compete in combative sport or team sport, rugby, wrestling, very high strength power sports. And it's just a matter of teaching some of these skills or tricks, whatever you want to call them. And there's lots. I just sort of gave you a couple of
Sure.
ideas that teach your nervous system how to recruit. And so it's not a matter of just passively accepting the load and moving through the squat like a melting candle or a 14-year-old on a skateboard, right? Where everything's just kind of collapsing.
Right.
We're going to teach, in fact, on the descent of a squat, we're teaching athletes to get taller. So really bizarre cueing that's not very conventional. And because I've learned from people that are pretty elite and I've trained pretty elite people, even if I'm doing rehab with a middle-aged mom like me, I'm still going to apply these
Right.
concepts to these people and teach them these things. The only difference is the dose. They might not move as much weight, as a 25-year-old linebacker, right? But the same principles. So yeah, Pavel's got some great resources and literature, and I've got an ebook on my website called Learn to Lift. And if you want, Jimmy, I'm happy to give your
Yeah.
readership a discount code to download it.
Well,
They
I'll
can
throw
have it.
that. I'll throw that in the show notes in the description of the video.
Okay,
I do want to
great.
talk
And
about.
it goes through some of this stuff.
We did
Hmm.
talk about research a second ago. We were making fun of it a little bit.
Yes.
Well, I do want to ask you a research question. Give me 1 second. We got to talk about ATI to keep us on the air. ATI leads the charge in PT clinical research, with all 900 clinics across the country achieving top marks in CMS's merit-based incentive program. They're the team to join for career growth. If you would like to explore opportunities, visit atipt.com. All right. So considering your critique of research and exercise prescription, we mentioned that before, for return to play, where do you think the gap lies? And then how can we bridge it? We love this bridge the gap term in PT, and I'm assuming other professions as well. So where's the gap, and then how we get around it? If you could wave a magic wand and just bridge that gap.
Are you going to, or do you want me to comment on the research in the field of physical therapy?
Yeah. Let's stay within this area.
Okay. I'm going to be a bit blunt and
Okay.
say that I would prefer that they took a page out of the sports science side of things. I find that if let's say the thing about PT is that there are sort of different facets, right? Like in terms of ways to treat an individual, and it could be manual. And I'll break it into two categories. It could be manual therapy, or it could be exercise therapy.
Right.
And the research in exercise therapy, it almost seems like it just repeats itself. It's the same types of exercises, the same sets and reps, the same sort of dosages. It's like they're staying in a silo. If they actually stepped out of that and started reading what a sports scientist is writing, or an exercise, like a kinesiologist might be talking about, because that they just live, this is all we live in is exercise. We don't
Sure.
live in manual therapy. That's not what we do, or that's with outside of our scope. I think that there's a lot to be honed because of how we look at things. Now, I'm not saying all physical therapists just read physical therapy research to learn their craft. I think probably the very good ones go far and wide,
Yeah.
right, into different areas. So I took it upon myself to scour the exercise-based research with ACL rehab. And I'll just give you a quick example. So there is, first of all, no clear criteria to return an athlete to play at all.
Right.
Even though there are like Melbourne guides and things like that, they're fraught with incredible amounts of assumption and error. And I would be shocked, or not surprised at the number of individuals that could potentially become re-injured, even passing some of those tests. But one of one of the things I came across, which I found very weird, was to allow an individual to start jogging. So let's say they have any lower body injury that's major, they had to have a surgery, so maybe Achilles, I don't know, patellar tendon rupture, ACL, whatever, that the individual needs to be able to leg press 1.5 times their body
Right.
mass before they're allowed to run. To me, we're actually talking about two completely different motor tasks. Um, I would what I do with my rehab is like, okay, if running is what something you need to be able to do, then what looks like running that is a progressive like load in terms of mechanical forces as well as just like sets, reps, volume, right? To be able to run for 5 minutes. I don't even know how many foot contacts that is in 5 minutes of running, but it's a lot. It's a lot of foot contacts. But they're low intensity, but they're high intensity compared to doing a body weight single leg squat.
Right.
Like 2 to 3 times ground reaction force compared to a single leg squat. So there's really no relationship. And that's the problem in the research is that they're saying to do these things and then these things that you're doing are going to prepare you to do these other things that are way different. Like it's like going to diving practice and then telling someone they're ready to play badminton as far as I'm concerned.
Because
So I also think the other issue is progressions, like the idea that a progression is a different exercise is also wrong. It's wrong when you look at motor learning, motor behavior research, because if you watch a baby learn to walk, they start with holding on to the furniture and then letting go. That's the progression. It's the same thing though. It's walking. It's just holding on to something and then not holding on to something and then walking faster and faster and faster, more proficiently, right? So what I challenge the researchers to do is to when it bridge the gap is to actually get a little bit more clear on the basics of biomechanics, motor behavior, and exercise physiology, and then they can start talking about exercise prescription. So I'm a shark. I'm really critical. Most of the research I read ends up in the shredder. And I go, wow, okay,
but that's good. That's what we want,
it is,
right? We
I
we don't want to
guess.
just accept things bluntly. We want to make sure we have people that question those things. That's the process. That's part of the process. We're
Right.
supposed to
I
trust.
also think that there's a lot of stuff we could do really well without having to read research.
Like
I
what?
shouldn't maybe say that.
Sure.
Well, okay, you've run marathons, right?
Yeah.
If
Slowly.
you, if let's say, and I never have, I've never ran further than maybe 16 kilometers, whatever that is in miles. So if I said to you, okay, Jimmy, tomorrow I'm going to start training for a marathon, you don't have to be a marathon expert, but you know kind of how to train for marathons. So you could probably say, okay, this should be your volumes for like your first week because you've done it. So
Right.
I do think that the best coaches and the best therapists are the ones that use their body
Do
and
it.
try this
Yeah.
weird stuff. So in my ACL course, I make the all the homework is doing the workouts.
I mean, shouldn't I mean I lucked out. Some of my clinical instructors were very big on you don't give someone an exercise unless you know how to do it,
I love them. I love
right?
them.
And
They're right.
go
Plus
do it.
we look silly
Show me. Do it, but for a while, right? Get good at
after
it.
a while.
Right.
Like my coaches used to say, you have question. You try this 10,000 times. Then you tell me, do you still have question?
That's the biggest teacher, right? Isn't that the best teacher?
I'm like, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah. Well, that had to be a cool
I
experience.
love it.
Did you learn from Pavel in did you go over the Soviet where were you?
No, I was here in Canada. My husband and I spent about 6 years traveling in and out of the
Wow.
States, learning from different people. So quite a few high-level American S&Cs.
Who else did you like?
In
Who comes to mind that you had a good time learning?
I really like Ron McKeefery. He's at UW right now. He's the head of their performance. I really like him as a coach. He understands people. He understands young men and what young men need to be told. He's old school. He's like around our age. We're young though, of course. Um, I really enjoyed him. I really love Craig Liebenson, and he's more on the rehab, side. He's a chiropractor, but he's super curious and he's always like just including people in his
Yeah.
discussions, and he's humble. And all these people, Brett Jones is another one on the East Coast. He's an athletic therapist. I'm part of that Strong First community. I've learned a lot from him. So those are kind of maybe my top four people that I think are really, yeah, like super knowledgeable, but just so keen to just share, like
Yeah.
share what they've learned, share what they don't know, share like I mean, I'm the first one to say to my students, I don't know. We don't know. We don't know the answer to that.
I lucked out,
Let's just
learned from a lot of people early in my career, both in radio and in PT, which is the smartest people, when they don't know something, they say they don't know. They like sort of wear it like,
right.
I don't know. Like they're the first to admit it. Whereas the people, you can tell, like, I'm going to keep talking until you assume I know this. You're like, I don't know what it is, but that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So I'm
Yeah, he's kind of full of
I
it. And it's okay to, even if you use social media, to say,
don't know.
these are my thoughts on this.
Right, 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 right.
You know, and then other people will chime in, well, what did you consider this? I'll be like, oh no, I didn't. That's
Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you for that. And it's a good learning experience. But a lot of times people are like, this is the way,
yeah.
this is, you know,
Well, one of the first episodes we did, and we've done 1,200, was Eric Mera, and he said just a great line, which is, this is what we think now. This is what science, this is what's told us now. And that now leaves the door open, and you are not boxed in. You're able to say, this is what I understand. This is how I understand it now, is a great way to say, this is my perspective. This is how I approach this. And it also just, it shows that you're open-minded. And maybe it's a reminder, even for no one else, for yourself, to remain open-minded.
absolutely. And I think we can learn a lot from our clients and our patients.
Ugh, yeah.
Right? Like today, I had an athlete I was working with. We're rehabbing her ACL, but she's complaining about back pain. Right? So I'm going, okay, does this bother your back? What do you notice this? Let's talk about this. And then the conversation ended up shifting away from the knee, which is fine. She kind of joked and said, the good news is my knee feels great. Well, my back's bugging me. Okay, you know, and I'll collaborate with her PT on that. We'll try to investigate maybe why she's experiencing
Yeah.
these symptoms. But the clients will often teach us a lot, right? And then we can go, oh, yeah, maybe it's that. Let's remove that, take away that negative for a week and see if you feel better. You know, that is really our job, right? As coaches and PTs, we're not here to necessarily always have like, oh, it's definitely this is
Right.
what caused it. A lot of times we don't know.
I know, but a lot of some people, especially in how education systems work, is I come into this system and I am coming here to be able to figure out the answer right away. And how healthcare
Yes.
sometimes works, right? Now we're just talking about systems, how systems work. And I definitely thought that's how I perceived it. I was like, I am going to be able to walk in and know the answer just from a few
Yeah.
questions. And then you get in there and you're like, oh, there's a whole lot I don't know, but you've got to sort of keep this face. But I think even if I was, Ryan Clark was a defensive back for the Steelers, American football, is a Pro Bowler, is on ESPN now. Before he was on ESPN, he gave a talk at a sports medicine conference that somehow I talked my way into. And he gave a talk. He was like the keynote. And he had this, like, he had this medical condition. So here he is, top 0.1% of the athletes in the world. He's playing professional. He's a Pro Bowler in the NFL. And he's going into the season and he's losing weight. He's feeling like just tired. And he's telling the team doctors, and they're like, we ran all of our tests and everything is fine. You're fine. And he's like, I am not fine.
Not fine.
So he winds up like firing his team doctor, going out on his own, and finds a new doctor. And the first time he sat with this new doctor, the doctor said, I have no idea what's going on, but we're going to keep checking stuff until we find something. We're just going to figure it out. And he's like, because he was like, I was laying in bed one day thinking I'm going to die, because he was like, it was that bad. Turns out he had like, it was a spleen or an anemia thing. And it turned out when he went to altitude, it really affected him or something. I might be messing, but the thing was, it wasn't normal. And his message, because this was all like sports medicine physicians and surgeons in the room. And he's like, he's like, here's how I define a good doctor or medical provider. Anybody is someone who's like, I don't know, but we're going to keep working until we figure it. He's like, I needed a teammate. I didn't need somebody who was on a pedestal who was just like, dude, you're fine. Go back to practice. He's like, I'm done. He's like, I then said, he had said at that moment, I said, if I die from this, that's okay, because I'm with someone who's at least going to try everything until we figure it out. That person was probably a great doctor, but willing to say, I don't know. But you know what? Come back tomorrow, and because this is important, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. That's what Ryan.
People just need their hope supported.
Yeah.
Right. They don't. It's not helpful. How is that empowering if you just dismiss somebody? I mean, if anyone knows their body best, it's that person.
And he mentioned that. He's like, like, dude, he's like, I know my body. I've been training for this. This is my life every day. He's like, this is my workspace here. and he had the whole room of these, elite. Sir, it was put on by Robin West, who is this she works for the Commanders. She's like sports medicine, and he had the whole room full of these people dead silent and just like wham, how he told this story. And he had them in the palm of his hand, and hopefully a lot of them walked away going, "That's a big lesson they don't teach you in school," and hopefully they listened to him because he was right.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I think it's just we're insecure sometimes, right? So if we think that if we don't tell someone what we think they want to hear, that we're going to come across as incompetent.
Right. And that's a you problem. And you need to get over yourself, is what Ryan was saying. He's like, I don't care if you don't know the answer. I need to tell you, I need to hear from you that we're going to go to war to figure it out, because this is a big deal for me. Because he was like, I'm laying here thinking I'm dying, and I got this guy saying, go, it's in your head, don't worry about it. Like, not okay from one human to another. Well, you're very skeptical, right? And I think skeptical has like a negative connotation to it, or like the sort of this. I personally, I don't. I like when people are skeptical and challenge with good intentions, right? Right. And I heard a phrase once, and it sounded like it didn't make any sense, and now it's like it makes complete sense. It was a question: would you rather get it right or be right? And I was like, those are the same things. It's like, no, arguing your point with no possibility, no matter what you're presented with, to ever change your mind, that means you're just trying to be right. But your goal to be right or get it right. And that was an aha moment to me. So you have skeptical mindset, which I think is great, and a willingness to challenge norms, as you're saying. You're reading research, you're saying, nope, not good enough, right? So how has that mindset benefited your athletes, your students? Like, talk about that, because you wouldn't still be using that type of mindset if it hadn't, in my opinion.
True. Yeah. I think it's at first it makes the students uncomfortable, right? Because they do, like you had mentioned, like you want to kind of come in and be fed the formula.
There it is. Yeah.
I want the formula. What is it? Give it to me. I'll memorize it.
Correct.
I'll put it on the final.
Correct.
Whereas I'm going, okay, you're going to do a case study. This is your case. Come up with analyze the case, figure out the lowest hanging fruit that you need to solve, the biggest problems you need to solve, come up with an intervention, and then justify it. And they're like, but is this intervention right or this intervention right? Depends on your justifications. So I think, but back to your point, that it's not so much about being right or having the right solution. It's having a solution that's backed by some level of evidence that might be plausibly scientific, but getting people to think that way, which everyone talks about critical thinking. Oh, at university, we get our students to think critically. Some teachers do a great job of it. I'm really fortunate. I'm basically around every single person I work with teaches like this. I'm at a very, very good university, and the faculty are amazing. Even the research faculty that have to teach, right? Because they do have to teach a bit. They're doing a great job with making sure it's like problem-based learning. And also what I do is I meet with my students after they've identified the major problem. So that way I know that they're on track, and they're not going to get like a really bad mark on it or something like that. Because my intention isn't to go, oh, great, you found it in your case study. Oh, sorry, you didn't understand the problem, so you got 5 out of 50 or whatever. It's okay, not quite. Do you really think this is more important than this, and why? We have a conversation, and then they back to the drawing board. So I think as long as we can have it as a process, right? And we make mistakes along the way, and somebody's there to kind of just have you consider other things without giving the answer away.
Yeah.
I think that's helpful. But I do think that in general, people are wanting to be right because they're afraid to be wrong. So they chase this idea of being right. I'm always chasing the truth, and like what's the best way to address this situation, right? So it's and what's going to work for this individual. But it's gray, and people don't like gray things. They like black and white things.
And to defend students, or to defend that feeling that they have, is when you're going through a lot of the classes that are prerequisites, it's physics, it's chemistry, it's stats. There are right and wrong answers, right? Because there's formulas, right? So you're after 8th grade is 9th grade, after 9th grade is 10th grade. There's a progression, and very few things in there are okay, with the exception of where my background was, which was a lot of English and history and writing a story. And so I was cool.
Great.
I was cool with gray. I was like, dude, everything's gray, because I interview people, and people are people. You think you go in with a plan on an interview with a rock star. I got lots of those stories, and think you understand which way it's going to go. And next thing you know, it's a hard right. And you're like, and your job is to adapt, but that's a skill too. The
job is a hard right. I love that. Man.
Yeah, it's like, oop, and now we're going this way. And for me, I liked, the clinical environment, and a lot of my classmates were 10 years younger than me, because I came into PT school as a second career student. And I remember thinking, a lot of them got uncomfortable with it when we learned subjective exam. They're like, well, what's the first question you should ask? And the professor was like, well, ask this and this and this and this. I was like, well, hang on a second. Is the first question always the same no matter what? And he's like, well, yeah. And I was like, my first question was never the same to anybody. I'm looking and seeing something. So my first question is always going to be different. And then I remember a classmate who I studied with was like, well, what's the second and third question? I was like, but you don't know the answer to the first question. So the second question should come from that, and the third, but there was a level of uncomfortability. And then it's when I recognized, like, oh, like, you never had this opportunity to do those things.
No.
And I worked in live radio, where it was like, dude, the light's on, the mic, this is on, we're going. So there's actually a group who does, in COVID, they did Zoom classes anyway. They're a bunch of therapists, and they do improv training. It's brilliant. And I keep saying I got to take the damn class.
I loved doing improv in junior high school. I loved it. That was so fun.
I would love to join, and I've said it for years that I want to do it, but it's a brilliant idea. And I think it is a skill. And you can strengthen that muscle of improv. And that's sort of what that is. It's a gym for lateral thinking and things like that. So, all right.
I love that. And I think that your background, I was a literary composition minor.
Oh, were you?
Well, yeah. So I agree. Like, you do need to use the other side of your brain, and that not everything is like, back to my original point, like, rehab training isn't a linear process.
Right.
It's super messy. And now I'll have a plan, but I won't stick to it.
Best laid plans. Yeah, it's guideline, right? Like,
it's guideline.
I wrote down a bunch of like talking points before we spoke. And sometimes you answered 2 or 3 of them in one question. And I was like, great, those are out. And now we're going to pivot over here. And then you said something where I was like, oh, you know what? I want to keep pulling on this thread and see where that goes. So it's, an interviewer is a guide. Like, you're never in charge of the interview, right? Because it's a conversation. And like, that to me was a cool lesson when I saw the parallels of communications in PT school. I was like, oh, I actually know something here. Great, good, okay, cool. Something translated. Something came from 15 years standing in front of a microphone.
I love it. I love the idea of improv. That's brilliant.
It's so great. I'll find the name of the group, but I think they do classes via Zoom, because it's specifically like improv for healthcare providers, which doesn't make any sense, but makes complete sense, which is sort of brilliant. All right, are you ready to do 3 questions?
Oh, sure.
Let's do 3 questions.
Love the PT Pinecast? Yes. Support the show by telling a friend or by leaving a review on iTunes or Google Play.
Here's 3 questions.
On the hot seat with 3 questions on the PT Pinecast.
All right, embark on extraordinary patient care adventures with Jackson Therapy Partners. It's jacksontherapy.com. Perfect for physical therapists eager to make their mark. Discover where your skills can take you at jacksontherapy.com. All right, 3 questions. First question. We're talking about interviewing. You once considered a career interviewing serial killers? Do I have that right?
Correct.
Our researchers find things. What drew you to that? What made you consider that? And then how does that relate to, or how does that compare to what you do now?
I've always been super fascinated in behavioral psych.
It's
like why people do. It's so interesting. So I don't interview serial killers, but I still talk to people, and I'm fascinated by what led them to where they are, right? So I still kind of get to do what I thought I was going to do, but I realize that I'm now in a really positive environment versus potentially being in a very dark,
Right.
sad environment.
Right.
So yeah, that's the truth. So I switched over to kinesiology after 2 years of forensic psychology.
2 years though. So you probably read some.
Mhm.
I mean, it's such it's why do we look at the car accident sort of thing? Because if you look, because we're able to track these things, the top podcasts and Netflix shows and stuff like that, especially actually for females. Females love murder. It's so
I know
weird,
we do. We're
right?
weird.
So
We're weird
it's the point
sex.
of
Yeah.
it's the point of memes too, because it's like, they did a skit on Saturday Night Live. They're like, hey, I've got Saturday night, my boyfriend's not around, I'm gonna stay in, pour a nice glass of red wine, and watch nothing but murder. All it's like, why do we do that? I'm like, I don't know, but they keep making podcasts and Netflix specials about it. I don't know.
It's true.
It is
Yeah.
true.
So I'm not alone, which is good.
All right, I was gonna ask you your favorite serial killer, but it's too dark. We can't go there.
Oh yeah,
All right.
too dark it is. Yeah.
Second question: coaching styles. Like having seen so many coaching styles, working with just some of the people that you even mentioned today, what's one quirky or non-conventional method in coaching you've come across that actually works? I kind of feel like 2 pencils and tennis balls feels quirky and non-conventional, but give me something else. Anything come to mind?
Well, I use a lot of humor, so I'm very, very silly. So that would probably, if I always ask my son, because I train him and his friends in the summertime, and I'm like, so what, can you give me any feedback? Like, what would you say about my style? Because he's super honest.
Right.
He's like, you're very silly, mom. Which is, I don't know, coming from him is like
Right.
kind of good, but kind of bad at the same time.
Well,
I have about the maturity level of a 15-year-old boy
Good.
most of the time.
Well,
Yeah.
so you relate.
So.
You're right. You are right there.
Yeah, but today I trained a 50-something-year-old woman, and I was
Wow.
still myself, and she was
Yeah.
looking at me like, she told me that if I didn't wear gloves, 'cause it's quite cold out today, that I would get arthritis. So the whole session, I just kept teasing her about my arthritis I was
Right.
gonna be getting.
All right.
Mm.
Third
Mhm.
question. You're known as a truth teller. We talked about that, a skeptic and a truth teller. Share a moment where speaking your truth had an unexpected positive outcome. We always talk about like people being too blunt and being a negative thing, but talk about a positive outcome on truth.
Well, actually, I had a meeting with a student yesterday, because we were talking in lab about her career. It's a third-year course, so the students are graduating either this semester or next onto their career, and she was telling me about how she wanted to work for, like, it's almost like insurance companies here sending her patients or clients to do rehab with active rehab. And then we were talking a little bit more about her background, and she comes from like, she's a foreign student. She had to live in her car at one point.
Oh,
Like, we're talking like pretty tough times and a tough place where she came from. And I said to her, what would it look like if you worked with a clientele that were more in control and empowered and in the driver's seat, like an athlete? So I said that to her in lab, and I guess it just marinated for a week because she met me in my office hours yesterday, and she's like, "You're right. How did you know that? Like, I don't want to work with people that have been in a car accident and that may really only be coming to see me because the insurance company is paying for it." I'm like, oops. So I told her the truth because I didn't see her that way. After the
yeah.
conversation I had with her previously, I don't see her as someone that, I don't see that. But I didn't mean to like push her in a different direction. I just sort of told her bluntly, like, I don't really see
Yeah, but
based on what you've told me.
think about what you might have just done is like drastically change the
Ruined her
trajectory.
life.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean,
I don't know.
because you didn't, because what you did was you asked her a question, right? And
Yeah.
she took that and you said marinated. You planted a seed and now it made her question it, which they're doing for themselves. You didn't tell her what to do. You asked her, all you did was ask.
Yeah, I suppose, and another kind of interesting part that I do my first years is I show this video. Her name's Kelly McGonigal she's a TED Talk video, and the title of the video is stress harmful to your health? So I asked my first years, like, how many of you think that stress is harmful to your health, right? And like 80% of the class is like, hand is up, and I'm like, okay, boom. I show the video. Basically, she talks about all the positivity there
Right. I've
can be
seen,
found
yeah.
in
Yeah.
in stress, right? And then at the end, all the students were they all looking at each other like I kind of embarrassed them, I guess. I didn't, that's not my intention, but
Remember.
it's sort of like, why are we viewing stress as harmful? Who taught you that? Is everything that is stressful a threat, or
Right.
is it potentially an opportunity?
No pressure, no diamonds.
100%.
But
Honey pea,
she
as
meant
the ninth graders say.
right. Wait, say that again?
Honey pea. That's what the ninth graders
Oh.
say. So now I say it.
But
Honey pea.
but there is a limit. There is and the types of stress, right? And I saw someone do a presentation on stress or eustress.
Yeah, right.
And so is
Distress.
it bad or good? We get to say this in physio a lot, which is it depends.
It depends.
It depends. All right,
It depends, and it depends how you perceive it, right?
Correct. Last thing we do on the show is the parting shot.
This is the parting shot.
Right, parting shot, Carmen. This is your moment. Last mic drop moment or soapbox statement. What do you want to leave with the audience?
Have fun. Life's short.
YOLO. That's what some of the kids used to say. That was like a hashtag for a while there. Yeah, parting shot.
YOLO. It's true. YOLO. I know that one. I filed that one away.
Yeah.
Love it. They also say on God all the time now.
I got to start going to Urban Dictionary again.
I don't even know what it means, and then I use it. I'm like, guys, am I using this in the right context?
Yeah.
And they're going, no, coach.
Yeah, well, go to Urban Dictionary. That's cheat code, Urban Dictionary, because they even give used in a sentence. All right. Parting shot brought to you by our friends from the Academy of Orthopedic Physical Therapy. Find them online at orthopt.org. They're industry-leading current concepts of orthopedic physical therapy, taking you from wherever you are in your career to maybe taking that OCS exam. Again, orthopt.org. Carmen, we'll put all your details so people can follow you and learn from you and do the whole nine in the show note. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for doing this. Your Majesty. I had royal music on the way in that I was going to play on the way out.
Love it.
Carmen Bott, appreciate your time. I say the best conversations happen at happy hour. Thanks for coming ours.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. Really.
Like what you hear? Tell a friend or leave a review on iTunes or Google Play.
The show today is brought to you by the Brooks Institute of Higher Learning, an innovator in providing advanced post-professional education. The Brooks IHL offers 7 on-site PT residencies, including orthopedics, women's health, geriatrics, pediatrics, sports, and neurology, as well as a neurologic OT fellowship, a competitive OMPT fellowship, and a speech therapy clinical fellowship. Therapists that complete a residency or fellowship through the Brooks IHL will markedly advance their knowledge and skills in a specialty area of practice. Learn more about how a residency or fellowship can help you advance your professional development at brooksihl.org. Our home on the internet. PTPintcast.com. Created by Build PT. Build PT provides marketing services specifically for private practice PTs. From website development and hosting, providing content marketing solutions for PT clinics across the country. See what Build PT can do for you today at buildpt.com.
The PT Pintcast is a product of PT Pintcast LLC. It is hosted and produced by PT Pintcast CEO Jim McKay and CBO Sky Donovan from Marymount University. We talk PT, drink beer, and record it. This has been another pour from the PT Pintcast. The PT Pintcast is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. More on the show at ptpintcast.com.